Hey guys, thanks for joining us. We'll get underway in just a moment. Just gonna make sure this is all set up properly. Just as soon as you jump on, let me know that you can actually see my screen and hear what I'm actually saying. Just let me know in the chat box. I'll just pop up the chat box. Where am I? Chat box. Chat. Can you see and hear? What's wrong here? Here. All right, we'll get underway in just a moment. Yes, Neil can hear me. Sean, cheers. Yep, cool. We'll get underway in just a moment. Just give it another about 60 to 90 seconds for other people to jump on, and then we'll get straight into it. Just as you come on, just making sure that you let me know that you can see me, that you can hear me. Well, you can't see me. The video is not working at the moment, but that's okay. And we'll get underway in just a moment. Super excited to be able to share this absolutely amazing content with you guys today. Going to be going through how to unleash your latent superhuman potential. Just also let me know where you're tuning in from. And one of the things is, like with all of these webinars, I just want to keep them as interactive as possible, just so I know that you're following along. If you have any questions throughout the entire process, just let me know in the chat box, because I'll wait to ensure that you're actually following along to make sure that we can actually move forward. The whole point of this webinar is to provide as much value to you guys as possible. So your interaction is essential. Brisbane, thanks for joining us, Jane. All right, let's just see this. All right, let's see if this is gonna work. All right. No, that's not gonna work. All right, let's get underway. So we're gonna go through as much content as we possibly can over the next 75 minutes or so. I'm gonna try and keep it as short as possible while getting through as much content as possible. So I highly recommend just making sure that you actually pay attention to as much of this content as we can. Turn off your phone, avoid being on different screens, just so we can get the most out of this. So if you don't actually know who I am, my name's Cody McAuliffe. I am a NLP coach, and I specialize in creating heightened states of consciousness to be able to get more done in less time. So I've worked with a lot of companies throughout Australia and internationally, and a lot of government organizations to be able to basically optimize anything that they do, as well as worked with a lot of peak performing individuals in terms of professional golfers, world champion athletes. I've worked with multiple federal politicians. So I've got a wealth of experience in all of these different things. And from all my experience, what I notice is that most people have normal or even low energy. They're getting results, but they're just running out of time. They've just got so many things going on, and they're consistently just stressed because they have so many things going on consistently. So before we get into the content, I just want to make sure that you're going to be okay with the speed that I talk, because I'm going to talk really, really, really fast. And I'm going to go through as much content as we can. And if you want to be able to find out more at the end, then I'll share with you exactly where you can do that. So are you okay for me to do those two things? Yep, happy. Yep, cool. Awesome. So if you think I talk too fast, then you're really just going to need to listen faster. Cool. So what we're actually going to go through is we're going to show you how to get the natural energy of a child without any stimulants or coffee, have a complete sense of calmness in high stress situations without taking mind-numbing alcohol or drugs, and to be able to get more done in less time without any productivity strategies, all while increasing your life satisfaction to the next level. Sound good? So if you're going to stick around to the end as well, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go through and send you the audio of this and the slide deck as well, so that you can go through and check out any references. But you just need to remind me at the end to do that, so that I can actually make sure that I do that, because when I get into these things, I just get into a zone and I just go and go and go. So one of the things that we consistently need to talk about is just like, right, well, how do we actually define superhuman potentiality then? And one of the things that we look at is if you're actually aware of it, it does not, if you're not aware of something, it does not exist to you. So when we're looking at superhuman potentiality, what we're actually doing is we're looking at what's outside your current belief system and what is outside what you currently believe is possible. When we're thinking about your current potential, when we're looking at the superhuman potential, we're looking at what is well outside of that, something you didn't even believe was possible. What is that one dream that you wanted to achieve that you consistently just don't take action towards, or you take a little bit of action towards? So when we're looking at superhuman potential, we're looking at what is outside my current belief system that I believe is possible. With all the clients that I'm working with, I'm consistently asking them, all right, well, what would be the best possible outcome that you could get? And you're starting to think of that for you right now. What would the best possible outcome that you could get be? In any area of your life, in your business, in your study, in any of these different things. And then what if your current belief was only 80% of what was actually possible? What if there was still another 20% available on top of that? And this is the thing, we instantly buy into this thought process of what is our potential, and we put a cap on it, which stops us actually moving towards it. So what we start to do is we start to go, okay, what actually is possible? What are people actually achieving? So we start to actually look at the science behind it. And some of the studies that I consistently reference are, there's a study by McKinsey and Company that basically had executives in Fortune 500 companies over a 10-year period. They determined that people who are tapping into their potential through this heightened state of consciousness, they had a 500% increase in productivity to those who weren't in this state. Now, these are already peak performers. They're already people at the top of the game, Fortune 500 executives. And it's not just a short-term study. It was over a 10-year period. So it's a dramatic difference. What would that impact be to you if you could get a 500% increase in productivity in everything that you did? How would that impact your life? And then we look at the next study here by Sydney University, 430% of increase in creative problem solving. This was a study where they took people in and they determined, they put people into this state, they put these electrodes on their brain where they elicited this state. And what happened in that state is they basically gave them this problem. It's called the 9-dot problem. Basically a creative problem solving thing. You do the test, and then what they did is they had a control group who they just sent in, and they put other people into this heightened state of consciousness, and they solved the problem 430% faster than those people who just walked in. So this just shows us the power of what we can truly tap into when we start to tap into this heightened state of consciousness. And when we look at this heightened state of consciousness, we're talking about the state of flow. Now, when it comes to flow, we're actually looking at creating the boundaries of what flow is, because it's very difficult to describe, because every single person's experience of it is completely individual to them. So what we actually look at is these are all the boundaries of it. We have the boundary of selflessness, effortlessness, timelessness, and richness. What we look at in these things is the self here is like our ego. It's the internal dialogue that's consistently narrating every experience that you're in. And if you're listening to this right now and you haven't heard that before, then it's the little voice that's in your head that said, what little voice? What we can consistently look at is being aware of that little voice, because that is part of our developmental process. It's what separates us from the animals, because the animals don't necessarily have this. They just live in the reptilian brain that they have. We have this part of our brain, which is basically the prefrontal cortex, which allows us to be able to have all this high level thinking based on the future and the past. And yet at the same time, it creates this mechanism which also creates a world of limitation at the same time. And someone just put their hand up. What happened there? Can all you guys still hear me? Just let me know in the chat box. Can you still hear me? Just make sure that's all rolling. Let me know in the chat box. Yep. Cool. Yep. Accident. Awesome. Thanks, Bernice. Thanks for joining us. So when we start to look at these components, this is one border of flow. When we look up here at effortlessness, when the effort becomes effortless, then we're in flow. Most of the time we're utilizing motivation to get a task done. We're using all of this time, energy, and effort to be able to focus on doing something, and we're driving, and then we crash. In flow, this becomes this perpetuating cycle. The more that we do the thing, the energy that it actually gives us. That's when the effort becomes effortless. We start to then tap into that flow. In this state of timelessness, time becomes distorted. It can either slow down or it can speed up. When I was 17, I got my license, and basically had my license for 5 days, and I went to go drive to visit my girlfriend, and then I had to go to do a family thing. So I'm driving along, running a little bit late, so I'm speeding. It's out in the country, back windy roads. It's been raining a little bit that day, and just driving along. Anyway, driving along this back road, and then I go into this turn, which is like a left and then a right. So it's like this long S, going quite fast, driving along, and then I turn into the left part. That's fine, but then start to turn there, and the back starts to slide out of my car because it's a little bit wet and going a little bit fast. So I correct, and then I overcorrect, and then I start to slide along the road. I'm sliding, still trying to correct, still trying to bring it back under control, sliding, slowly go off the road, and then slowly slide into a tree, and everything happens in absolute slow motion. The windscreen smashes, the front car becomes smashed in, and all of these things happen in slow motion. Now, as I described that, that's about how long it felt like it took. And yet the experience of that was maybe 5 seconds. This is what happens when we start to step outside our prefrontal cortex. In that instance, I was a highly stressed situation where basically our brain rediverts all of our energy into the essential components. So it's like, all right, time now becomes irrelevant. Focus on what's going to save your life in this instance. Now, we don't have those experiences all the time where it's like literally a life or death situation. And yet we can create that bypass of that aspect of our brain by going through and creating these states. Does that make sense, guys? As we think about that, we look at the richness component then. The richness component is all about it becoming self-perpetuating, when the purpose of the activity is the activity, which sounds paradoxical in nature, and that very much links into a lot of the ways that we can start to actually create flow. What we do in this instance is we can instantly start to create the boundary of flow. Because if we understand that there's no concept of self, there's no concept of time, there's no concept of needing motivation, there's no concept of it taking our energy, it being boring for us, it's just rich. We've got these 4 boundaries where we can start to experience this little zone here where we get into when everything starts to come together. I guarantee that, like, you've had this time in your life where everything on this list has been experienced. I guarantee there's been a time in your life where you haven't had that internal voice, that internal critic running the show. I guarantee there's been a time where you've been doing something and it's just been effortless. I guarantee there's been a time where you've experienced this timelessness experience, this richness experience. And when we look at that timelessness experience, it can also speed up. Have you ever been with someone where time just flies. Like it's where the saying comes from, where time flies when you're having fun. Well, as we think about how our brain works, and depending how much science that you want to get into of it, our brain works in a specific way. It calculates time over different parts of our brain. And when the front of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, becomes knocked offline, which is the simplest version of what happens in flow, our view of time instantly becomes altered, because it's calculating in all these different areas and it stops calculating it. It only becomes instantly in that present moment, which is a lot of kind of spiritual people will consistently be talking about. They're talking about, right, how do we become present? If you think about The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, or books like The Untethered Soul by Martin A. Singer, they all talk about this present moment that we can be in. And when we're in that moment, then everything else disappears. This is what we consistently focus on. This is what we ultimately look at creating in a state of flow. So as we start to look at the science behind flow, we want to actually look at, well, what's the frequency of it? So we've got all the different frequencies of experiences that we have. Delta is like a deep sleep. We've got theta, which is drowsiness or the first stage of sleep. We've got alpha, which is relaxed but alert. We've got beta, highly alert and focused, or gamma, which is epiphany experiences. So just based on those different frequency ranges, what do you think you're in on this call right now? And anyone who says delta, then I'll slap you. Jokes. So what frequency do you think that you're in? Are you in theta, alpha, beta, gamma? Alpha, alpha, alpha. Cool, we've got some alphas. Alpha, alpha, awesome. Most people are in alpha. Now, the majority of our time is actually spent in alpha or beta. And what we want to look at is, what's the difference? What's the difference between relaxed but alert, but highly alert and focused? Well, it just depends on how much your brain is bouncing from one topic to the next. If you're in an anxious state, then you're going to be in beta. And what actually occurs is, when we're in this heightened state, this beta state, for a long period of time, it becomes extremely draining for us. This is what the state that we actually get into when we're fueled by coffee. Coffee actually gets us into this beta state where we're highly alert, highly focused. And yet what we're actually doing is we're pulling all of this energy from the future, which then we create a debt from, that we then ultimately have to pay back, which is why caffeine works extremely well for a short period of time. And yet if we become dependent on it, it means that we fast track our rates to burnout. And when we look at this stimulus, it's not being overstimulated. It's just being a low level stimulus that can create this beta state. So what we look at there is, what then is a flow state? What frequency is that at? Flow is about 8 hertz. It bounces just under and just above 8 hertz consistently. And what also occurs in a flow state is you start to have these little spikes up to gamma. And we have these epiphany experiences. We start to create connections between all of the things that are actually going on. I watched an amazing documentary on the weekend on creative minds, and it's like, creative problem solving is not creating anything new. It's creating connections between two seemingly unconnected things and bringing them together. It's creating inspiration of something, seeing a tree outside and then creating a building based on the inspiration from that. Creative problems, like the example that they used is, there was this person who was creating this micro technology, and instead of making micro technology, what she did is she created normal technology and created this process to be able to shrink it, which meant that she could create all of these tiny little microchips at a much more affordable price comparative to anyone else. So what she did is she learned that from seeing a toy that shrank down. You created this thing, you created this work of art, and then you shrank it down and you could look at it under a microscope or something like that. She created this inspiration from some other area, and she thought, well, how can I apply this over here? This is what creative problem solving actually is. And this occurs when we're in flow with these epiphany experiences. So a great example of this is, all right, well, I need to be kind of half asleep and relaxed but alert. How do I do that? The example of this is there's two people that did the same thing that you probably have heard of. Thomas Edison and Albert Einstein. They both did the exact same thing, which was basically the first documented experience of people kind of hacking flow in the modern age. So they both did this. They both knew the power of this state, which is just before you get into a deep sleep. So what they did is they'd grab their keys, put them in their hand, and then they'd sit in their armchair, and then they'd have a nap, and they'd have their keys facing down and have a plate underneath them. Because what they knew was, as soon as they got to a point where they were about to get into a deep sleep, the hand would release and the keys would fall to the ground and it would wake them up. But they would wake up in this state of being right on 8 hertz. They didn't actually understand that it was 8 hertz at that point in time. But this is what they're actually doing, because they knew that when they would wake up, they'd be in this heightened state of consciousness. They'd be in this creative thought process, which they could then apply to everything that they were trying to create with. And it's like Thomas Edison and Albert Einstein, it's like two of the most famous creative geniuses of the last couple of centuries, I guess. I don't remember when. It's like, yeah, that's still a century and a bit ago. So when we think about that, it's like, all right, well, how do we create this on a more regular basis? Then how can we create this ourselves? How can we buy into and create this state of flow in our everyday life? How can we start to then tap into that? And what is the process to be able to then do that? Is that something that you guys want to hear about? Just let me know in the comments so I can have a drink of water. Yes, definitely. Awesome. Love it. All right, let's get into it then. What I notice is when most people come to me, they come to me at a point where they're tired, they're stressed or unproductive. Now, when most people come to me, they're not actually extremely stressed, they're not extremely unproductive, and they're not extremely tired. Generally, they just have good energy. It's like, I've got good energy. It's not too bad. It's not amazing. It's like, I'm not a child, but I've got okay energy, right? Over here, they're like, no, I'm not really that stressed. Until they start to go through some of the processes that we run them through, then they start to go, okay, actually I was a little bit more stressed and now I'm super calm, and that creates the experience for me to be able to get even more done. Again, when they come to me, it's not like they're getting nothing done. They haven't done anything. It's like they're doing things. It's just that they want to go to what the next level is. They want to get even more done in less time. And there's 3 components that create this frame of reference to be able to get the results that we want in this. And as we look at these things, we want to take a 3-dimensional approach to it. As we look at the screen here, I'm going to actually I'm going to draw because I love drawing. Awesome. So we've got this here. We've got one-dimensional experience. When we've got one-dimensional experience, what that's actually doing is it's just going, all right, well, I'm just going to work on getting more energy because I'm a little bit tired. But what actually happens when we start to focus on all 3 things, it's like, I'm going to work on my calmness, I'm going to work on getting more done in less time, and I'm going to work on my energy. What this actually does is it creates this 3-dimensional approach to what we're actually looking at creating. And what that means is we have exponential results because we actually do live in a 3-dimensional experience. We don't just live in a horizontal vertical here like this. We live in a 3-dimensional experience, the vertical, the horizontal, the depth experience. So when we start to focus on one of these things, we start to get results in all of these different dimensions because that's the reality that we start to live in. So what we consistently look at is actually going through each and every one of these things. It's like, all right, well, if I work on all of the components to be able to create this, which is our conscious thought processes, our unconscious thought processes, and then our individuality and our needs based on those things, then we can create this three-pronged approach to be able to get all of these things increased, to be able to feel the energy of a child again, to be able to get that complete sense of calmness regardless of the stress that you're actually in, to be able to actually get even more done in less time. Because even if you are getting one of these things, I guarantee that you can get more of them. So then we start to map out, well, what are all the different components of those things? What are the components of genetics? And we're going to go through as many of these as we can during today. Obviously, we can't go through all of them today because we've only got 75 minutes, but we're going to go through as much as we can in the time that we have. So when we look at genetics, there's three things that we consistently look at, which is our archetypes, which are patterns that we live our entire life by that most of us are unaware of, that impact us in specific ways. So the next thing that we look at is like our flow types. So there are certain ways that we can get into flow completely different to other people. And if we're trying to get into flow in different ways and it's not aligns with who we are individually, then it just becomes frustrating for us because it's like, oh, it's just not working. That's why the best example is, we'll talk about that in chronobiology. It's like chronobiology is the optimal time frame for your day. If you're, for example, a night person and you read a book, all right, 5 a.m. crew, let's get up at 5 a.m. That actually puts your body into stress as soon as you wake up, and that impacts that stress throughout the entire day. And the inverse is also true. It's like if you stay up past midnight, but your body is aligned with being more of a morning person, well, that creates stress in your body. And this is ultimately based on your genetics. It's why I test every single client that I work with. I test their genetics to determine where they sit on this scale, so we can actually map that out. And we're going to go through that today as well. Then we've got our conscious thought processes over here. Because if we're in stress again, then what's going to happen is, well, we're not going to be able to get into flow because we're not getting into that relaxed part of it. If we're agitated, we're not going to be able to get into that relaxed part of it. So we've got environment, which is basically how we interact with what's going on around us. That includes our relationships with our friends, family, co-workers, all of these different things. We've got our capabilities, which is our ability to actually do the thing that we're actually doing. So this is essential. If we have too much of a challenge, if there's something's too challenging for us, it just becomes frustrating. So we don't have the capability to be able to do it. So it means that our ability to roll forward and continue to get results just diminishes. And then we've also got behaviors. So this is what most people actually start with, and it's the last place to actually start. Does that make sense, guys? Are you following this so far? Can you kind of see how all of these different components map out to it? Just let me know in the comments so I know that you're following so we can move forward. So I can have a drink as well. Yep. Cool. Awesome. So then we look at our unconscious. These are the things that we don't actually see. And yet these things impact what we're actually looking at creating. If we don't actually know what our purpose is and we can't actually communicate that within a single sentence, well, then we don't have the primal powerhouse of purpose. Like if you think about kids, they ask the same thing all the time. It's like, why? And if you don't know the answer to the question of why, then they just get frustrated, right? They just continue down that process. They need to know why. They need to know the purpose of it. They need to know the meaning of it. Because if we don't actually have that, that just creates this stress for us. And then it holds us back in every area. The same thing happens with our identity. If we don't know who we are and what we're actually creating in our life, then there's no possibility of actually following through with that. It creates this stress because if this is going this direction here like this is over here, you don't necessarily know what that is. And then you've got beliefs over here. All you can see is all this tension of everything going in different directions. If your flow type's going in a different direction over here as well, well, all that you're getting is this increased tension and stress. You're trying to get pulled in all of these different directions and it doesn't necessarily work. So what we look at is these are the three things that we're going to go through. We're going to go through chronobiology in terms of your genetics and what that looks like. We're going to go through a belief, and we're also going to go through some behaviors there as well. So what we want to start with is like, right, well, what are we actually trying to do here? What are we trying to create? And I love Albert Einstein. I quote him all the time. And this is one of his amazing quotes. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And I like to change that thinking to consciousness. Cannot solve our problems with the same level of consciousness we used when we created them. So ultimately, your level of consciousness is going to determine what your level of flow is, what your level of results are in your life. So if we can expand that, well, then we can expand your ability to be able to get results. We can expand every aspect of everything you do. So then the question is, how do we expand our level of consciousness? And what is that? And this is a concept that's called the Johari window to be able to explain this. There are things that I know, and there are things that others know. That's what we call the arena. That's where you actually get the results in life. Over here, there are things that I don't know, but there are things that others know, which is a blind spot. And this is consistently what I work on with people. I talk to them and I can instantly see that they've got a blind spot of something which is creating the results that they have in their life, which is not actually what they want to create. They have this dream, this goal, this desire, this wantingness to experience something or have something or be something or do something. And yet they're just not getting it. They're not getting what they actually want. So we highlight their blind spots and we move them into the arena. Over here, it's like I've got things that I know, but there's things that others people don't know. That's the mask. That's where you're putting on an act. That's where you're being inauthentic, because you have this underlying fear of what will people think of me. But then we've got this other experience over here, which is our potential. This is what we're actually looking at tapping into, what our potential is, which are things that I don't know and things that others don't know, which is our potential, which is where we start to tap into that flow. So when we think about this experience, what we're actually looking at is what's the process that we need to go through for us to be able to tap into our potential. There are certain things that we need to do. For our potential to be able to tap into the flow, we need to take the things that other people don't know and the things that we don't know and have a conversation with people so that they can actually create awareness around those things which are blind spots to you. Because if they're blind spot, then they can actually then move into the arena where you're going to get the results. If you become aware of them and you realize that you're putting on an act in that instance, you can then move it into the arena where you actually get those results. So when you're conscious in both areas and other people are conscious of it, that's where you can actually get results. When we look at our level of consciousness, we look at this area here. Well, that didn't go as well as I wanted there. Oh well. Clear that. So when we look at this is where we actually get our results. So the process that we consistently go through is moving these things into place. And when we go back through this process, what that actually looks like is we're going from here to here, and we're going from here to here. Because currently, chances are you don't know what your flow type is currently. You don't know what your chronobiology is. You haven't gone too deeply into your archetypes. You don't necessarily know what your purpose is. You don't know what this is. And this is where you're going to get the results. Like your behaviors will definitely get you results. But if you're focusing on just doing the behaviors, well, that just creates actually more stress for you, because then it's like, well, I know I should be doing this, but I'm not. That's because of what's going on in all of these other areas. This is all the unseen, which is creating that result. So as we start to move through these processes, we start to allow you to actually start to get the results you actually want in your life. This is how we start to tap into flow. We start to tap into those benefits of flow, 500% increase in creative problem solving, 500% increase in productivity, 430% increase in creative problem solving. So this is another quote. This is by Carl Jung. He's probably the second most well-known person in psychology. There's Freud, and then one of his students was Carl Jung. And he says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This rings true. Because if your unconscious is going out here like this, well, then it's going to create your current results in your life. As we start to become aware of that and move that into our consciousness, that allows us to increase our capacity to be able to get into these flow states. Because what's occurring over here is you've got these blocks where they're getting pulled in all these different directions. So there's all this tension which is going on in your life. It's like you're having one arm which is being pulled to the right, the left arm is being pulled to the left, and then the left leg's being pulled to the right, and the right leg's being pulled to the left, and you're just getting all this twisted up because you're getting pulled in all these different directions. What we do is we start to create alignment between all of those areas so that you can actually start to get the results that you want to get. So what we can start to do is we can start to even map out where people are currently at in terms of their level of consciousness. And we go through a process to be able to do that. So this is on that, by the way, that's in your workbook. So I'd highly recommend filling that out. If you need me to go back to that later, we can go back to that. And this is in your workbook as well. This is the different stages of development that we talk to about people. So we've got depressed, we've got drifter, we've got dreamer, defaulter, driver, on demand, designer, and director. And we're going to go through and talk about each of these stages. And you're going to be able to determine kind of where you sit. And then also what we do is when I'm working with people, I'll test them to be able to see exactly where they sit on this scale, because there's certain ratios of where people sit, because you don't just sit in one. There are certain different sections where you create this, basically this report that you get to determine where you sit so that you know what your capacity to be able to create is in life. Does that make sense? Just let me know you guys are still following in the comments, just so I can have another drink of water. Awesome. Yep, all good, sweet. So what we want to look at here is depressed is pretty obvious. It's like you're unhappy with life, contemplating suicide, not the best experience of life. You've got your drifter here where you're just resigned to the way that it is. I talk about it being like the passenger. You're going along for the ride, but you're not really happy about where you're going or anything like that. Move into the dreamer stage here, where you're kind of dreaming about what you want to happen, but you're not actually taking results. Now, the majority of people that are on this webinar are going to be more in these higher levels. So the defaulter stage here. So everything's happening. The key point here is fault. So there's a lot of fault with your experience, who you are, the people that you come in contact with, which creates this suppression of your experience. It blocks your ability to be able to get into flow at a faster rate. So you're getting okay results, but you're just not happy with them. Up here, as the driver, you're in control, you're getting results, you're driving everything in your life, you're driven by your drive to achieve, and at the same time, you're still forcing everything. As we start to move on to the higher levels up here, this is where we start to actually get into flow, on demand. You get into flow on demand, and that means that you become even more in demand in what you do, because everyone wants a piece of your time because you're just getting so much more done. You're creating all of these solutions to things that other people weren't even aware were problems. From there, we move into the designer stage where you're actually living your life by design. You've created this entire reality to create the life that you want. And generally, you're working with a team at that stage. Generally here, most people want to just get to this stage where they're here. If you're working with a team, then the goal is then to become a designer so that you can actually create that entire reality for everyone. The biggest component or underlying thought process here is of impact. The final stage that we have here is about being a director. This is being a director of flow for other people, being a director for all traffic. And what's actually occurring is the primary thought process at this level is about creating a legacy. So none of these stages are better or worse than any of the others. The whole point is every single person comes in at a certain point on this spectrum. And if you know where you sit, just like on any map, which is what we're going to show you in a second, the map, as soon as you know where you are on a map, then you can determine what the next step is. So the examples are here. So if I go here and I've got like someone who's a defaulter, it's like, cool, they've got too much work, they're not getting enough results. The biggest limitation they have is based on pride and they very much need to consistently look good to other people, and they care what people think of them. They're also consistently focused on what they need to do. Whenever they talk to me, it's just like, all right, Cody, awesome, what do I need to do? And then I go, okay, cool. That instantly means that they're in either one of these two stages. Based on people's language, I can instantly determine where they sit and what the next step is, because you don't necessarily just go from, all right, well, I'm depressed to being up here. That's just not how it works. Just like in a map, you don't just teleport from one point to the other. It's like, okay, cool. I'm noticing that this is showing up for you. So let's actually just go, all right, cool. Let's go to Drifter. Let's go to here. Let's go to here. And let's move up through that process. For if we can do that, that just means that you can increase the rate at which you can get results. Is that making sense so far, guys? Just let me know in the comments. A bit of orange here. So another example that we can start to look at here is, all right, let's have a look at driver. Generally, a lot of the people that come onto these webinars, based on the way that I communicate it, yes, small text. Just make it a little bit closer here. So we've got the driver here. With the driver, what we want to look at, it's like they just don't have any balance. They're getting good results, but they have this need to struggle. So it's not actually allowing them to actually get into flow. Because as we start to get into this on-demand level, that's when we start to get into flow. The reason why I actually communicate all of these levels is because people are at different levels. I still work with people who are depressed. I generally work with them in events, not in my coaching programs, because I know that if they're down at this level, they need a completely different strategy to allow them to move to the next level. And what I notice is when people are talking to people who are depressed, they're often prescribing strategies for this level here, a defaulter or a driver. If you tell someone who's depressed, they just need to cheer up, that's basically the same as saying to someone with one leg, come on, just hop along and hurry up. It's just not going to resonate with them. It just actually makes them feel much worse about their situation, because then they know that they should just cheer up and they can't. So it creates this underlying shame of their experience. And ultimately, whenever someone's depressed, they don't actually want to kill themselves or commit suicide. They just want the pain to stop. They do everything that they can to allow this pain to stop. So if you were to create, all right, just cheer up, or just do this, just do that, and that's a strategy for up here, that becomes a losing strategy for down here. And if you like, if we talk about that example again of where that would apply, okay, if you can just be positive at a defaulter level here, well, then that's going to be a winning formula at that level or the driver level. But again, if it's like be positive up here, well, they're automatically going to be positive. They're not going to be focused on all the negatives in life. If someone's not taking any action, then it's like, right, well, we need to inspire them to be able to take action so they move through this process. So if you understand exactly where someone sits, then you can apply this to their individual needs. And this is the thing, like, the reason why I do events for these lower levels, these levels here, is because I know that they need inspiration. Information doesn't change anything for them. They need inspiration. They need to hear stories of people who've been through exactly what they've been through, so they're actually inspired to make a change. They're inspired to go from there into taking action, because then they've gone from the focus of this having over here into doing. Then they actually start taking action. But then that also starts to create a limitation at the same time. So our order of our thoughts is going to create our reality. So if we focus on, right, who would I need to be? Then what would I need to do? Then what would I have? That creates a high level of thinking for us. It creates this frame of reference where we can actually create the results that we want to create. If we go the other direction, we say, all right, well, I'm going to focus on, all right, what do I want to have? I want to have $1 million. What do I need to do to get $1 million? Well, I need to do all these things in business. Well, then you're using motivation. You're not using flow at that instance. When we're focused on our being, then we're focused on how we can actually begin to create all of those things. And when we look at what level you're at, we look at, well, what are your results then? Because it's like, oh, yep, I'm cool. I'm at a high level at this. I'm on demand. I'm a driver. I'm all of these different things, which is, there's probably some element of truth to those statements. Yes, you have those components. And there are also different sections where we can actually map out, because you might have a frame of reference which is at a low level over here of being a drifter when it comes to time. You might have a frame of reference that when it comes to the things that you say, that you might be at this level here. You might be a dreamer. And then it's like, oh, well, I don't actually need to fit in. Then you might be up here at these different levels, but then your average score is much lower then, because if we look at the numbers here, a 0, a -1, or a -2 creates this negative overall score for you. You just never have enough over here. Again, you've got all of these lower scores for you, which then pulls down your overall score. And when we do the test to be able to determine where you sit on this scale, you get an overall score as well as a score for each individual aspect. So what we look at is like a great example is like, show me your results and I'll show you what your level of consciousness is. So based on these different levels, what do you think level Gary V would be at? Is he a defaulter, driver, on-demand, designer, director? Because he's all about the hustle, right? So if you know Gary V, he's all about the hustle. It's all about working hard. And this is the thing. When most people think about Gary V, it's like, all right, well, he must be the driver then. He's all about hustle, because it's all about struggle, working your ass off, just work. Can I go back to other screen? Which other screen? This one. So Gary V is at the director stage because his is all about legacy. You see, what most people think is, well, if I'm not driving and I'm not working my ass off, that means I have to do less. Generally, what happens when people get into flow is they just work the same amount of time, their results just increase. When you look at Gary V, yes, he's working a lot of hours. He's getting amazing results. And everything that he talks about is, well, this is the legacy that I'm going to create. It's a perfect example of someone who's at this top level. So what we do is we actually look at people's results in those different areas. So once we determine where people sit, well, we can actually start to go, all right, well, what's the process to move through that? And that's a 10-minute overview of something that I take normally 30 weeks to go through with my clients. I go through specifically through a process to work people through that, to go through being a defaulter, because you start at the foundational level, to moving into the driver stage, to moving into on-demand stage, to move to the designer stage, to move to the director stage. By changing your thought processes around each of these things, what occurs is it raises your level of consciousness so you can get better results. Now, that's not to say that you're going to go from being a defaulter all the way to a director in that time frame. The whole point is what it does is it allows your thinking to evolve, because any change in consciousness or thinking takes time for you to actually integrate into your light, into your life. So an example of that is one of my clients, Leon, which is one of the case studies in the workbook. He came to me a year ago. He was doing well. He's better than probably most average trainers. He has his own gym. He's doing pretty well, but he just really wanted to have a bigger impact on the world. He was going through a little bit of a questioning around what he was doing with his life. He'd been doing it for 6 years and he was doing pretty well. Like, he'd be in the top 5% of trainers in Australia and income wise. And he came to me and he's just like, oh, I just don't know if I'm doing the right thing. We worked together and we're still working together. I had a call with him just before this. And in the time that we've been working together, he started in July last year and continually working together today. And the results that he's gotten, he's written a book, he's done a 12-month course. He started the 12-month course in November and he finished it last month. He's written a book. It's at the publishers, getting ready to be published. He's added, it's about 32% to his business revenue without actually working more hours. And his favorite part of it is that he now surfs more than he ever has in his life. And what we did for him was he came to me at this defaulter stage, and now he's at the on-demand stage and moving into the designer stage. All that we did was we were aware of his thought processes. He was getting okay results, but he really wanted to go to the next level. So we allowed him to be able to move to there and then to the next level from there. That's the benefit of actually going through this process of raising your level of consciousness by utilizing flow. Flow is the outcome. The process is raising your level of consciousness. Can you see how those two things can link together to be able to create ultimately what you want to create in your life? Just let me know in the comments. And I'm just looking at the time, so I'm probably going to start talking real fast. So get excited. So Dr. Joe Dispenza says you can't have a change in consciousness without a change in energy too. So what we're consistently looking at doing is if we want to increase our energy, what we want to do is we want to evolve our level of consciousness so that we can actually tap into more energy. And the way that we start to do that is by testing your genetics to determine what is your ultimate chronobiology, which is basically like your ultimate timing for your day. And this is individual based on different people's needs. So this one's mine. It's optimal for me to breathe between 6 and 7 a.m. So I either go to yoga or do some exercise at that time, and innovate here between 6 and 8 p.m. is optimal. That's my flow time. That's when I'm most creative. So that's when I do my writing, a lot of my content and things of that nature. Different examples. Yeah. So here's a different person. This person, they plan between 7 and 9 a.m. They sleep until 7 a.m. So I can get up at about 5:30 and I'm perfectly fine. If I get up any later, then it's generally just not as optimal for me. Again, this is another example where people get up at 6 a.m. It's optimal for them to be able to get up at 6 a.m. And they use a lot of energy during this time frame here. But then they have an actual point where they're optimally in flow between 7 and 9 p.m. This is very similar to one of my clients, Brooke, which we'll talk about more in a second. So then we've got this other example here, which just highlights, again, move between 4 and 6 p.m., but also rest from 8 p.m. When we start to look at the detail on these things, you can actually start to see what you actually should be doing at that time frame. So for me, this is my one. Good time to be organizing, checking emails. So normally when I'm having breakfast, because it says that I should have breakfast at the same time here in the other section, I have my breakfast while also just basically getting rid of my inbox for the day. So I go through anything that's come through overnight and get into that. Then from 8 till 11 a.m., active bursts. So it's really good to be able to get lots of marketing and stuff done at that point in time, mental work. But then in the afternoon, which is now 1 to 3 p.m., is interact. So this is when I book all of my calls because it's best for me to be interacting at this point in time. So I align this and I'm more likely to be able to get into flow during this. I can instantly just start to get into the webinar and just go, and just basically communicate everything that I need to communicate and then allow that just to flow out of me. There's no motivation. I lose track of time instantly, which is why we're already smashing through a lot of the content with limited time remaining. And we instantly just get into that process. And I do that because I can align my days with that based on my genetics. So an example of this working extremely well was Brooke. Brooke's one of my clients as well. He came to me and he wanted to train for a marathon and was getting up super early, doing super long hours of like training. And what we changed with him was two things: his morning routine and his before bed routine, because he was basically just doing lots of mentally draining work, and then basically just crashing out when he got home at night, because he'd do networking events at night, get home at 10 or 11 o'clock, crash out, and then to be up at like 4 o'clock in the morning to go for a run. This was just basically 100% burning the candles at both ends for him. He was just getting burnt out, basically. So what we did is we changed his nighttime routine to add meditation before he went to bed, and it meant that he could survive on less sleep. And we got him to get up just a little bit later and start his day a little bit later, and he just had so much more energy. It basically just completely transformed his energy levels throughout the day by just making that slight change to him, because it was just at the point where it was burning from both ends. And there are some people that can actually burn from both ends, that can perform on lower levels of sleep and are better to nap during the day. He was not one of them. So we had to determine that, and that allowed him to be able to do that. And he recently just did his first marathon not too long ago, and pumping out, like, he actually went to do base camp as well, Everest base camp as well. So that meant that all the training was then for that. The impact on that on his business was he had I remember January this year, which is normally his quietest month, was bigger than any month that he did in last year. So it was this dramatic transformation of evolving his level of consciousness so that he could get better results, and then that started to really pay off at the start of the year. And so that's the power of utilizing your energy effectively based on your genetics, based on your chronobiology. And the reason why we want to actually allow you to get more energy without coffee is because coffee becomes this stimulant, which then takes away from your future energy. So like only you know how many coffees that you're actually having. And that's going to start impacting you over a period of time. I remember when I was having like 4 or 5 coffees a day, and how that was actually impacting me. I was pushing burnout consistently. And what I found out was, based on my genetics, my heart runs on adrenaline, which is awesome, except if you have caffeine, it overstimulates it, and then I become extra fatigued super quick. So that was why I chose to quit coffee. But I also chose that because my genetics said that was a higher risk for me. I'm higher risk of having a heart attack compared to other people. Whereas other people can have as many coffees as they like, and it doesn't impact them in the same way. It just depends on your genetics in that instance. Cool. So what we've gone through there is just the chronobiology component of that. We've also started to go through some behaviors around that as well. For the behaviors that we actually have, are like, well, if we choose to get up at those points in time, if we choose to have all those coffees, well, they're ultimately our choices. Our chronobiology is going to determine what that actually is. And also what our level of flow is going to be determined by our level of consciousness. So one of the things that we're going to start to go into now is just a common belief that we start to talk to people about. And this is a belief that, like, nobody's perfect. How many people have actually heard that saying before? Nobody's perfect. Just let me know in the comments so I can have a drink. Yep. A lot. Yeah, definitely. Countless. Yeah. So when we have this belief that nobody's perfect, it actually creates this oppositional energy to that. So it's like, nobody's perfect, so I'm going to justify my selling out on me actually creating what I want to create. And it also then creates these other countless beliefs that actually come in on top of that. It's like, well, I'm imperfect, so I'm also broken. And I'm also incomplete. So what I start to do is I start to look at relationships to be able to allow myself to be a complete person. And I like, everyone's probably seen that scene in Jerry Maguire where he says to that woman, he's like, "You complete me," which is extremely romantic. And at the same time, it also indicates that he believes that he's incomplete without her, which then also creates this underlying stress for his experience. Because if he sees himself as incomplete, broken, or imperfect, well, then that's the only way that he actually shows up. And that's only one aspect of the entire experience. And the reason why I talk about this is because this is something that used to come up for me. I used to consider myself imperfect, broken, and incomplete. And I had this experience when it was 7 and a bit years ago. My mum passed away, and she passed away because she didn't go to the doctor when she had cancer. And she was one of the greatest impacts on my life. She pushed me to be a better person. And when she passed away, I thought that she was the one that gave me all of my potential. I thought that she pulled out of me what I couldn't pull out of myself. And what I became aware of was she allowed those things to come out of me. And the reality is they still came out of me, and I was the one that created those experiences. And that entire experience of her passing away, I created all of this anger around. I blamed myself, I blamed her, I blamed all of anything that I could, because I thought it was a broken experience. I thought it was an imperfect experience, and I thought it was an incomplete experience. And I thought all of those things about myself as well. And now that I can look back with hindsight, I can see what that actually created in my life. That experience of seeing my mum slowly fade away created an appreciation for life that I could not have without that experience. I became aware that from that experience, that created the contrasting appreciation for life. From that experience of believing that she was the only way I could actually tap into my potential, I experienced the contrast and the beauty, the bliss, and the joy of becoming aware that that was always within me, and I was the one that brought it out. You see, we consistently see our experiences imperfect, and yet the alternative is it can also be perfectly imperfect. Because if I didn't have that experience of that pain and that suffering with my mum passing away, I wouldn't have the appreciation for life that I have today. I wouldn't be the person who I am today. So we can have a belief that nobody's perfect or no experience is perfect. Or we can come from the place of every experience is perfect, whole, and complete, because it also creates in that moment the possibility of the contrasting experience. That pain and that suffering that I went through created who I am today. When we think about beliefs, we consistently buy into one side of this story, and we don't look at the other side of the story. For years, I bought into the story that was a horrible experience. That was shit. I lost my mother. And it took me 6.5, 7 years to create the awareness around that. To be able to take that step back and go, you know what? I can look at this experience in my life completely differently. And when we start to look at it from the other side of the spectrum, instead of just pain and suffering, it's like beauty, bliss, and joy. Starts to remove all the negative emotion around it. I start to let that go, I've moved that from something being a belief that I've bought into to a new capability in my life. I can start to create from that place. I can start to use that as fuel. I can use that as a communication tool. I can use that as an experience to be able to communicate to you the power of that. But previously, that belief was creating limitation for me. It was blocking me getting into flow. That's a common one. We all buy into this belief that nobody's perfect, which is 100% true. And at the same time, every single experience and every single person is perfect for that point in time. You see, we can still evolve over a period of time. For every moment is a different evolution of our experience. So that means that I'm perfect, whole, and complete in this moment. And now that it's a later moment, I can see myself as perfect, whole, and complete for this moment, which then removes all of the stress, the upset for me. It allows me to instantly be in that present moment, which is what we talked about at the start. It allows us to be in that space of timelessness. It allows us to step into that place, to be able to tap into that. Then we can actually start to see ourselves as just that perfect, whole, and complete, comparative to imperfect, broken, and incomplete, and needing something external for us to feel value in our life. Does that make sense? Cool. So as we look at that experience, even in that experience, I was coming from a point of, like, before that, I was very much in the dreamer. I was like consistently just focused on the past, allowing that to drive everything that I did. And what that reframe did was allow me to start to get back into action in those areas. And then other things that I became aware of, other beliefs that I let go of, to be able to move through that process, which is very much on this side of the spectrum. It's all of these. If we're in depression, we're in shame. We're a drifter, we're in victimhood, victimization. We start to move through this, the need to look good. Everyone needs to look good to a certain point. The need to struggle, the need to work hard, the need to have drive, the need to fit in. We develop this when we're in our teenage years. We want to belong, and yet we try to do that by fitting in, which creates this underlying stress for us because it doesn't actually give us the outcome that we want. So as we think about those concepts, we've started to go through all of those areas. We went through, as we talked about, that chronobiology, went through the behaviors around those things. So I was go through the beliefs on those things. So you kind of see how we start to go through all of those factors. And want to actually start to map out, well, what's the impact of you being out of flow? Based on this, it's just like, this is the example that I consistently go to for people. It's like, if your charge out rate was only $100 per week and you're working 5 days per week, 40 weeks per year, because you got to take 3 months holidays, then the current impact of being out of flow, of just getting 1 hour less productivity, is like $20,000 a year. It's a massive impact. When I talk to most people, they're just like, oh yeah, I'm going okay. And it's like, okay, cool. So you've got average energy. You're not extremely tired, but you've got average energy. You certainly don't have the energy of a child. You've got a certain amount of stress, but you're okay. And you're getting a little bit done. You're not extremely unproductive, but you're not getting as much done as you could. Well, that's just the impact of it. That's just a $20,000 impact based on 1 hour difference a day. And this is what I'm committed to creating for people. It's just like, I'm not going to say to people that I'm going to I'm not going to say that they're going to get a 500% increase in productivity to start. What I am going to say is the people that I work with can get at least an hour more out of every single day without actually putting in more hours, which allows them to get them faster results, to get them that massive return. And this rings true for all of my clients. Bernice, you on here, Bernice? Thank you are. Bernice is, this is Bernice. She was just on the news recently. Absolutely amazing transformation. She's been on Sunrise. She runs a meditation business. Yes, I'm a case study. Good work, Bernice. You're the best. Absolutely amazing business, absolutely growing. And when she first started with me, it was a quite small operation. She was just running a couple of events here and there. Now she's expanding interstate and has a massive team of people that she's working with to be able to do that, and expanding massively. Yeah, I don't know what else I can say about Bernice. She's absolutely amazing, had an amazing transformation. This is one of my favorite ones. Laura came to me and she was working with me, and after 12 weeks, she told me that she was engaged. Because she hadn't said it before, because she was looking at trying to get out of her engagement. So we worked together for a while and worked on quite a few things. Had an amazing transformation. And this is me actually at her wedding. Same guy at her wedding, because she'd broken through all of the things that she was creating around that relationship. And now they're happily married. So that's just an amazing example of what you can actually achieve in all these different areas. So we've gone through all the different things. I've talked really, really fast, as I said I would. We're about to wrap up quite soon. I also mentioned at the end I was going to share if you wanted more help, where you could be able to get it. So I'm just going to do that for you guys now. Cool. So one of the things that I consistently talk about is, if information was the answer, you'd already be a billionaire with six-pack abs and you'd be completely happy. The reality is you might have some of those things, but chances are you don't have all of them. So information is great. Like the webinar is great. Where the rubber hits the road is the application of it. It's the application of actually finding out what your genetic profile is to optimize all aspects of that, to be able to determine what your flow score is, to be able to determine all of that. So in terms of this, if you want to actually go through the process of actually finding out what your flow score is, then I'm going to make an offer for you guys today. It's going to be the simplest offer that you'll ever see. All you need to do is just book in to jump on a call for a clarity call. Now, normally these calls, a clarity call or a call like this, I'll charge $120 for. Because you're on the webinar, I'm going to give you the opportunity to jump on this individual call for free if you book in today. Now, a lot of people that you talk to in these instances are going to go through examples of like just basically using it as an opportunity to sell to you. The reason why it's a clarity call is because at least half of this time is actually creating breakthroughs for you. So it's going to take me 15 minutes to determine exactly where you're at. And then what we're going to actually do is we're going to go through and create some breakthroughs for you so that you can actually start to move through the different levels that we talked about. We're going to actually start to go through some of these things so that you can actually see how it works. We kind of touched on it a little bit today. We didn't go into too much detail. And then if we determine that you're suitable and you want further help with that, then we talk about what the next steps are for there. So if this sounds like it's something for you, then I'd highly recommend doing that. It's very simple to be able to do that. All that you need to do is basically go to this link and book in for a call. Does that make sense? Can you kind of see how simple this process really is? And you can find out so much more about yourself to be able to then be able to get the energy of a child, to be able to get more done in less time, to be able to create a complete sense of calmness in high stress situations. So when I'm working with people, I also track all of their results. So the results from the program that I offer is 100% of people have had their relationships positively impacted. 67.7% of people wish they started the program sooner. 87.5% feel more aligned and in flow. 87.5% have more energy. 100% have been able to get more done in less time. We don't talk about your finances, and yet 75% of people had their finances improved just by doing the course. 100% of people, even if they've finished the course, still get value from it. So it's something that we actually set you up so you can actually get results for life. And a lot of people want to feel secure and at ease in life, and that's another result that we've been able to get for people. So if you just check out that link in the comments, just make sure that's actually going to go through to it. Oh, can't see that. So I'd highly recommend organizing your time to be able to jump on that. As I said, normally $120 for today. If you're on this call, you get access to that for $0 just on this call. If you want to book in after this webinar, then what's going to happen is it's just going to come up with the price on there. So this link is specific to that. So I'd highly recommend booking in for that to be able to get that value, to be able to see exactly where you sit, so we can see what your score is and go from there. Sound good? Any questions with that? Just going to make sure that that actually goes through. Does that link work, guys? Just double check for me. No, it's not it, is it? It didn't for me. Yep, there we go. Just try that second link there. Just make sure that actually goes through. I'll click through and make sure it actually works. Yep, there we go. You can book straight into my diary there. Yep, second worked. Awesome. So I highly recommend actually just booking in for that. If you're willing, the reason why I do this on webinars for no charge is because if you're willing to invest the time with me, then I'm willing to invest the time with you. That way we can start to determine if it's something that you want to do to actually work together. And even if that's not, then that's perfectly fine. You're going to have a greater understanding of yourself, where you sit, to be able to see exactly what the next step would be for you. Does that make sense, guys? Have you guys gotten value from this call so far? You can kind of see how we go through all of the different concepts to be able to highlight exactly how to be able to get all of those different areas from flow. The link isn't working for me. I'll just direct message it to you, Jennifer. Did anyone have any other questions at all? The third time seeing some of these concepts, and I always feel like I understand in more depth. Yep, awesome. Good on learning extra connections from already learning. Yep. You're making me rethink my caffeine intake. Yeah, I've been there too, Jen. Like, I used to absolutely smash caffeine until I became aware of it. Like, I guarantee caffeine will get you amazing results, but it gets your results in that beta brainwave frequency. So it just means that you're forcing it. And especially if you're doing long periods of tasks, it just becomes draining on your brain, which then has an impact on it. Awesome, Alina. Yep, cool, awesome. Yep, I can have a chat to you about that. Any other questions with any of that stuff, guys? Just let me know. Thanks for joining us, Sean. Thanks, Denise. Awesome. Thanks, Caroline. Looking forward to chatting. If you have any other questions, just let me know. Cool. Who we're missing? Thanks for joining us. Jenny B, thanks for joining us. Jenny B, you're on twice. Love the commitment. Thanks for joining us, Denise. Thanks, Alina. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, Jennifer O'Sullivan. Thanks, Sean. Thanks for all joining us, guys. If there aren't any other questions, then we'll wrap up there so we can finish on time. And I'll send you a link as well in in your email as well to be able to book in over the next 24 hours so that you can actually get access to one of those calls. Thanks again for joining us, guys. Really appreciate you taking the time out to be able to invest in your own personal development. I really love when people are willing to actually learn more about themselves, learn more about what's available out there to them. So I appreciate you taking the time to be able to invest it in yourself and your future. So thanks for joining us.